what this all implies is that if there's two channels that you're communicating on, which is the literal channel of what you're saying, and then there's this underneath perception, your eye contact you mentioned, your tone of voice, your rhythms, how you respond to things. That's called your subcommunication. Subcommunication is going to matter far more to girls than communication. All right? So again, pickup line, easy to fake. The tone of voice while saying it, a bit harder to fake. Right? The tone of voice when given shit, even harder to fake. So subcommunication matters more than your communication. And this is why, back in the day, a little story of pickup history, in about 2002, 2003, when we'd teach like pickup programs, we'd create these like sequences of routines. Tell this story, use this tease, that kind of stuff. And we as coaches would go say these things and do these things, and they worked really well. Students would do them, and they worked not even a little bit well. They worked so god-awful badly, it was ridiculous. Okay? They're so bad. Why? Because the delivery was all wrong. Right? In fact, they worked worse than if the student had just gone up and just said whatever came to their mind. Right? Because if the student had said what came to their mind, they might have been perceived as weak or nice or lame or whatever, but at the very least, they wouldn't be perceived as having an agenda. Right? But when you're going up and you're saying these like cocky asshole lines, and all your body language is saying like, I'm weak and nervous and I hope this works, that's about the worst reaction you can possibly get from a girl. Okay? So again, the exact same words with different subcommunication just won't work. Right? And the subcommunication matters more than the communication. All right, why is that? Because it's unintentional. Because it's more likely to be negative. Sorry guys, sucks, but it is. Because it's difficult to change. How many of you guys have tried to change your subcommunication? Yeah? How easy is it? Not very, right? Not very easy, which is why this is what girls are queuing on, right? The sort of like happy and sad truth of getting good with girls is that in the process, you have to make yourself a better person, right? Because all the easy things to fix are dishonest signals, right? You have to actually like mature and grow in some way to give these more honest signals. I also remember that these are not conscious responses on the part of girls, right? So a lot of times, if you ask a girl, why did you like this particular guy or why did you not like this other particular guy? Sometimes they'll know. Sometimes they'll explicitly know, but a lot of times what it really was is it's something like his vibe was a little off or he was perceived as having an agenda, and then the girl will single out some little trait that may or may not actually be the case, but that's what she rationalized, right? Because in order for the genes to be acting effectively, they don't have to be acting consciously. Does that make sense to you guys? That last part is very important to understand, right? I'll give you kind of this may muddle it or may make it clearer, but I'll try. Have you guys ever seen like a chicken that plays tic-tac-toe? Have you ever seen that? Some of you guys, a few of you guys? You can teach a chicken to play perfect tic-tac-toe. Like you can teach a chicken to never lose a game, okay? However, do you think you can teach a chicken to understand the idea of winning and losing and to care and to like understand like strategy and placement of, not really, right? They're not that sophisticated. So how can you teach a chicken to play tic-tac-toe if they're not smart enough to fundamentally understand any of the concepts in good tic-tac-toe? Here's how you do it. Basically, you have like a little thing that they peck at. And what happens is when they peck in certain patterns or when they peck in certain ways, they get fed. And when they peck in other ways, they don't get fed. And they have no idea why they're pecking in that way. They just know that this particular thing leads to a good stimulus, this other particular thing leads to a bad stimulus. And they learn it truly on a subconscious level. Like they have no fucking idea of the rules of tic-tac-toe, but they can play it perfectly just through their instincts because they've been trained. Does that make sense? So it's the same kind of thing with us as people, right? We oftentimes can act very intelligently on an instinctive level without rationally even knowing what we're doing, right? Because it's been trained through millennia of evolution and decades of personal experience, right? But it's also a very, very important thing to understand that there is this logical emotional split. Okay, quick note on all this evolutionary stuff, which is this. A lot of people, when you think about evolution, what do people say? They say survival of the fittest, right? You guys have heard this, survival of the fittest? That's not what it is for humans, really. And the reason for that is human beings are at the top of the food chain. So we all pretty much survive. Like humans against nature, we're all doing just fine, right? Where we don't do well is in reproducing against other humans, okay? So for us, it's not about what's called natural selection, survival of the fittest, it's about sexual selection, right? It's competition for mates against other human beings, okay? So the upshot of this is that our evolution has a lot to do with how we interact with other human beings, not how we interact with the natural world, and a lot of it has a social nature. Does that kind of make sense, right? So it's not necessarily like, for example, stand up for a second. Okay, so this guy versus me on the savannas of Africa, who do you think's better off if we were left alone? Probably him, right? He could beat up more predators than I could, right? Now, I'm not going to necessarily say I get laid more than him, but there's a good chance I do. I don't know, he may be a pimp, I don't know. But, you know, whatever, right? But the point is, I can look the way I do and have him look the way he does, and I still have a chance of saying that's true. Does that make sense? Because it's not just about the natural selection factors, it's about all these social selection and other factors. Thank you, go ahead and sit down. Thank you. All right, so understand that, right? Understand it's not just about how many like lions we could beat up or like how many buffalo we could kill anymore. It's about these other factors involving how we deal with other humans and how human beings react to us. So that's absolutely critical, all right? So far, I've given you guys a framework for a lot of things. At this point, I'm going to get into like the attraction triggers and the really technical nitty-gritty stuff. Before I get into that, does anybody have any questions about this kind of stuff so I can kind of give you guys a solid base? Yeah?
So specifically about the agenda part,
Mm-hmm.
how do you, like, if you really like a girl, how can you not have an agenda towards her?
It's a good question. So that's sort of like the fundamental paradox of game, right? So there's this, on one hand, you want to be free from outcome, right? As in not having an agenda. On the other hand, you need to have intent, right? And intent is perceived as attractive. If you don't have any intent, you don't show any like agenda, because intent kind of is agenda, then you're not going anywhere with the interaction. So it's a little bit of a paradox, right? So how can you move things forward without having an agenda? The answer is you can't, okay? However, what you can do is you can have a good agenda or a bad agenda, okay? So if you're a girl and my agenda towards you is I want to fuck you, leave you, hurt you emotionally, and leave a baby inside you, that's not a very good agenda for you, right? However, if my agenda is I want to get to know you, enjoy some time together, and possibly build a great relationship and maybe raise kids together, that's an agenda that's a lot more palatable and a lot better to you, right? And so there's always an agenda. If there were no motivation, there'd be no action, right? That's like the fundamental, like, one of the fundamental differences between like a computer and a human being is human beings, we have volition, we have a desire to do something, right? It's what makes us human, what makes us powerful in a lot of ways. But there's good motivation and bad motivation, all right? So a girl is going to perceive agenda from you, period. But the question is, what is the agenda? And is it an agenda that's favorable to her or unfavorable to her? Does that make sense? Cool. Yeah?
From like a female psychology perspective, why do they try sometimes to protect their friends or, you know, cock block, for lack of better terms?
Okay, so there's possibly a lot of reasons for that. It's a really good question though. So I'll give you just a series of potential reasons. I'm sure it's different case by case, and sometimes they don't, by the way, right? Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. One thing I'll throw out is usually if you're a celebrity, they're not protecting their friends nearly as strongly, right? Or if you're in their social circle and well-known, they're not protecting their friends nearly as strongly, okay? So the question you should look at is what are they trying to protect their friends from, right? They're trying to protect their friends from possibly getting used by the player, you know, in a savanna evolutionary sense, being left pregnant and alone, right? They're trying to prevent that, right? Because you gotta understand that's a real possibility, right? Also, in the environment we evolved in, it's a lot of small tribes, so any stranger is treated with a little bit of like, you know, the phrase stranger danger, it really meant something back then, right? So that's a very valid thing in order to try and protect the friend, right? Also, the fact of protecting their friend, it's sort of, there's a reciprocity where if they protect their friend will protect them, and they would want that, right? So it's considered like the good and right thing to do by their friends. And finally, if they are protecting their friends and people see them doing that, that enhances their social reputation, right? So if they're keeping their friend from being slutty, it makes them seem less slutty themselves. Whereas if they're letting their friend be slutty, it means they condone that behavior. They might be perceived as more slutty, so it reflects back on them. So those are a variety of reasons I would give. There may be many others, but those are off the top of my head, the biggest ones I'd think of. Yeah. Yeah.
When girls call you out, when they're like, oh, you're probably a player, you probably like fuck a lot of girls. girls.
Uh-huh.
I just own it, and I'm just like, sorry, you know? And I have a fear that I border on the line of just like a fucking hoe bag. And I'm just like, that guy versus like a high quality guy that happens to get laid a lot, you know what I mean?
Right.
So the question is, how do you fall in the latter category?
Okay, so the first question is, where do you want to fall, right? Because you can get results and you can have good things from both, okay? And the real answer is that there's a gray area. There's a black and a white. There's way too much of a player that I distrust even for a one night stand. And then there's like nice, pussy, pathetic guy that I wouldn't have sex with even if he bought me 20 dinners, right? So you clearly don't want to be outside of that bounds on either side, right? You want to be somewhere in the middle. That said, you also can sleep with girls from different frames, right? You can sleep because remember, girls will sleep with guys for different reasons. Sometimes they'll sleep with a guy because he's the best genetic option, even if he won't stick around, especially if she has a backup guy or he's just like that much better than her usual standard, right? On the other hand, they'll tend to prefer if you would stick around, right? But if you are the guy who they don't even think would stick around and then you decide to, in some ways you have even more power and you're perceived as even more like they're so much more lucky to get you. So it can actually be a better frame to start with if you want to mold the relationship to the type of relationship you want. So first, be careful what you wish for. Like understand what you're asking for and understand what you actually want. But basically, what you want to do is be genuine and perceived as not having an agenda, but at the same time, be perceived as genuine not having an agenda completely by choice rather than by manipulation, right? That's like the perfect sweet spot, right? Does that make sense? So like I could be that fucking asshole if I wanted to, and I would totally get away with it because I'm that high value, but I've decided to do this, and there's no agenda behind it because clearly you can see that I could do the other. Right, so that's like the perfect sweet spot. All right, so the question is how to know, essentially in a nutshell, how to know if you're being too nice and what to do about it. Is that the general gist of the question? Yeah? Okay. So there's no such thing as too nice.
Or too boring.
There is such a thing as too boring, for sure. All right. There's no such thing as too nice in and of itself, okay? However, there is such a thing as nice to the point that it's predictable and boring, right? Because, okay, if you're too predictable, girl knows she can have you. The guys that girls know she can have usually are low-value guys. You're associated with low-value guys, you must be low value. Does that kind of make sense? Right? So you have to be careful of that. However, imagine like, I don't know, imagine like a Brad Pitt or George Clooney or someone who's like a known celebrity. If they went out with like a normal, average, non-celebrity girl on a date and were just super, super nice to her, she would love the fact that they're being nice to her. Right? Because their value is unassailably high. There is no amount of nice things they could do. I mean, there might be, but it'd be very, very hard for them to do so many nice things that it would lower their value, or so many like obvious boring things, because they have an honest signal of real social value called fucking fame and massive wealth, right? And so they're not in danger of that. Right? So there's not such a thing as too much nice either. If you were to look at me talking to a girl and you guys talking to girls, I probably do and say more nice things for the girl than you guys do. Okay? I probably do. However, I also do more things that give a girl an emotional response, are interesting, are exciting, are fun, that capture her imagination than you do by like tenfold. Right? And so the ratio for me is that the niceness is not the entirety of my communication. It's just a small fraction of my communication, right? But that said, I actually am nicer to girls than you are because I can be and still keep their interest. Does that make sense? So instead of thinking about holding back on your niceness, like not being nice or not giving things to girls, think about being so amazing that your value is unassailable and you can give all the things you'd like to them and provide all the things you'd like to them. Does that make sense? Right? So yeah, I like to look at game not as a thing where like I'm trying to avoid making the mistakes. I'm trying to look at game as a situation where I'm trying to do so many things so right that it's almost impossible for me to make a mistake that would overwhelm that. Does that kind of make sense to you? Right? That said, how do you know if not if you're being too nice, but if your ratio is too much on the boring side? You usually can like kind of feel the sexual tension. You can usually tell like the indicators in the investment from the girl going down. So if the investment was a certain level and it's going downward, it's getting less invested, then I would say go back to some of the things you did early on that got her attracted in the first place, and only once it's reestablished, then go ahead and like be more nice guy again.
How do you tell it goes to the point, like it starts off on the phone,
Mm-hmm.
the point of just being like very logical, like, like you.
That's typically going to be the case. That's usually going to be the case, even if she likes you, okay? Because she picked up the phone in whatever mood she was in for that day. Right? She picked up the phone and she's not, when she met you, she was exposed to you for a period of time and all the good emotions that came with that. She picked up the phone and in her body, the emotions, the physical sensations in her body are the emotions that were in her body from the day. So you have to expect that when you start the phone call, you may have to do some work to get her back to like feeling great and enjoying it and stuff like that, right? Now sometimes maybe she was in a good mood when she picked up the phone, you don't know, right? But you can't expect to automatically pick up right where you left off, right? Yeah. Okay, I'll take maybe one more.
Okay, so can you give an example of how men might make decisions emotionally and justify it logically?
I mean, just people in general, like in a sales situation, right? Let's say that you go for shopping for like a house or a car, and you set a budget, right? And you're like, this is what I will spend. And then you see that car you really like, that like really attracts you, you're really into, and then you go over your budget. But then you justify, oh no, it's okay because I got a good lease term on it, or it's a good idea because right? It's the same kind of thing, right? It happens, consumer behavior just across the board is a great example. Sometimes the purpose of communication is not literally the facts being exchanged, right? In fact, oftentimes, right? Let's say that you and I are close, right? Let's say that we're good friends and you had a tough day at work, right? And let's say that you want to tell me about your tough day at work. Do you think I enjoy that conversation? And do you think I care about like the guy with like the toner and the issue there or that the memo your boss sent you? Do you think I directly care about any of that stuff? No, I don't, probably. But I might care about you, right? And the point of conversation is not to exchange facts very often, right? Oftentimes, the point of a conversation is to exchange emotions, right? Or to show solidarity with you or show that I care about you. Or with a girl, it's not necessarily to like, defend a logical thesis about something. It's to exchange a series of emotions and both feel good in each other's company and presence and, maybe have that go in a physical way or maybe not if you're just friends, right? But so you don't literally have to be totally bought into every single thing and every message you send, but just understand the communication as that sharing of emotions. So if I were to send puppies to a girl, it wouldn't be because puppies are the most important thing in my life. It'd be because I know that that'll get a certain emotional response for her and that's a positive thing for our relationship. And I value our relationship, I value that fun and that positivity, and I am bought into that. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. Any more before we go to the attraction triggers? One more.
You said there's like one case where buying a drink, or not one case, but there's some case where buying a drink could come out in your favor, and I guess it depends on frame maybe. Like I've had cases where a girl would just be like, let's get drinks, and like that's kind of a we frame, so I don't mind it as much. And like I'm still new to this, I don't know what I'm doing, but like I don't know, I guess it's just kind of like I can see bringing a girl to the bar as a way to isolate.
Yep.
But a lot of the time I do it, like because I'm not drinking, it seems kind of weird. And
Okay.
like, then I'll be like, okay, let's get drinks together. But then it's kind of already like,
Right.
I'm trying to get her to the bar.
Sure.
Like she kind of has an
So this is a great general discussion. This is just absolutely a great general discussion for a lot of these principles. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about buying girls drinks. All right. So let's say you walk up to a girl and you say hi, and she goes, "Buy me a drink." That's a situation where you don't want to buy the girl a drink, typically. Okay. Now, that's a dicey one, because if you buy a girl a drink, you're supplicating, you're buying in, that conveys a lot of neediness. It conveys that you don't have your own agenda, a lot of negatives, right? On the other hand, if you have too much of an agenda about not buying her a drink, that's negative too, right? If you're like, no, I would never do that. All right, bye, right? So the right answer to that oftentimes is, oh, I'm not even there, here, tell me who you are, right? And just ignore it, get on with it, build more social value, build more into the relationship, so that doesn't become the primary factor, right? A lot of times that's the issue there. But let's talk about, say you have been with a girl for a while, and you mentioned isolating the girl from a friend, it's useful for that. The other thing that drinks are very useful for is for conveying a vibe, or conveying sort of an experience with the girl, all right? So I'll tell you a situation I had recently. It was on one of my immersion programs in London, and I was with a girl, and I'd been with her for most of the night. I thought we had a wingman for a friend and we were about to pull and then it didn't happen, but I was still with her and we'd made out and we'd been around and she really liked me. But then she was with a group of people and there was this guy that was kind of vaguely associated with their group that tried to like fuck up my situation by pointing out an age gap because I'm like 35 and she was like 20 or something like that, right? So he pointed out the age gap to her and like whatever. And she said, and this is a direct quote, she said, "It's fine, I don't care, as long as he's drinking as much as I am." It's an interesting thing to hear. Interesting thing to hear. Now, what does that mean? Where's that coming from, that she would say that? What's the psychology behind that, right? It's a little bit of social conditioning. The idea here is this. The reason she might have an objection to the age thing is the idea that like I'm this like creepy old guy trying to manipulate and use her, right? So if I was sitting there not drinking and trying to get her drunk, and then I'm like years and years older, then that looks really bad and it feels really bad. The narrative of that is very bad to her, right? But if I'm engaged in the same experience with her, if I'm getting drunk with her, I'm willing to lose my faculties a little bit as well, right? Then she's okay with it. Also, there's the factor with girls in general where drinking is perceived of as like it gives you more of an excuse to let loose. It gives you more of an excuse that what happened wasn't your fault. So it takes away some of that slutness, right? It lets you maintain your social reputation a bit while doing something that normally might harm your social reputation, right? So it's very, very useful there. And then also, I'm gonna talk a little bit later on about a thing called iconography, but there's a certain narrative to like, oh, we got drunk together, we had this party together, and it led to sex. That's a socially acceptable narrative, whereas some other ones might not be, okay? So alcohol is useful in those kind of ways, right? And so, to be honest, I'm not telling you guys should drink because it's physically unhealthy, or that you should drink a lot, especially if that's physically unhealthy, but I am telling you that for a lot of guys who don't drink, if you did drink, you would get laid more. And that's just a flat out fact. Sorry guys, it is. Because a lot of the situations where sex goes down in our society revolve around places where alcohol also is present. It just is. And if you go to a place where the primary activity that people are engaging in is drinking, and you're like, I don't drink, well then the question is, why are you there? And what does that imply? It implies agenda. It implies you're there for some kind of agenda rather than to be a part of what's going down. So it is dicey. Now that's not to say it can't be done. It's not to say that there aren't ways around it. So for example, if I decided not to drink for a particular day, I sometimes don't drink because A, it's unhealthy, but B, I'm a public speaker, right? And if I drink too much for an ongoing period, it messes up my throat and my ability to talk without like sniffling every 2 seconds. So if I'm in that situation where the girl's like, why aren't you drinking or something like that, I can totally not drink, but I want to not drink from a frame of I am with the party and I'm having fun also. So a lot of times I'll be like, oh girl, you have no idea how many I've had today already, right? I'm already like way past you. You have to catch up, right? Or I might be like, if you went out as much as I did, you wouldn't be able to drink every night either, right? But I'm conveying that I am part of the scene and that I'm like okay with the scene. I'm not this person who's like, don't you drink in a bar? Don't do that, right? That's not good. Right? That's because A, it's agenda, because then why are you in the bar? And B, if you're gonna shame her on that, you're sure as shit gonna shame her on sex, she would think, okay? So you have to be careful of the implications with that kind of thing. Does that all kind of make sense?
That was an awesome answer. Thanks.
Thank you, I try. Okay, so the question is, do you pay on dates?
Yeah.
Okay? My answer, yes. Or at least not yes, but I'm willing to, all right? So here's what I would do. If you're worried about the expense of your date, take her to a cheaper place, okay? Rather than supplicate in the first place by taking her to an expensive place to try and impress her with how expensive the place is, instead, take her to a place that's less expensive that you just enjoy and you'd be willing to cover the drinks. Because a lot of times it may not matter. A lot of times she doesn't care, she'll go Dutch, she'll even pay, whatever. But the times that she does care and that it does matter, it creates this friction and it creates this perception of agenda. It's like, wait, he doesn't want to like invest a drink in me? What's his, like, is he trying to get something out of me? Is he trying to win at my expense? There's all these different like things that go on, all these negative emotions associated with the confrontation of who pays, right? And so for me, I'd rather just be willing to deal with that and just make that a non-issue in order to, have things proceed nicely. And for me, look, I don't know about everybody here, I make decent enough money that if it's like, what's an expensive drink? $15 or something like that, probably. If it's, and maybe 2 drinks. If it's not worth $30 to me to sleep with a girl, I need to be going after better girls anyway. I mean, to be really, really honestly fair, right? So for me, and also I value my time, right? If my big investment in the date isn't what I'm spending on her, it's the time I'm spending on her, right? So that's just the way I look at it. But if it's going to be an issue for you, take her to a cheaper place where you can fully, it's much better to take her to a cheaper place where you can fully experience the place and do whatever the fuck with full freedom there, as opposed to take her to the most expensive restaurant in town where you're like, well, you can order this, this, or this, but don't order the whole menu, right? That's a very bad honest signal. Taking her to a dive bar is not necessarily even a bad honest signal, right? Just that's where you went. Taking her to an expensive restaurant being like, you can only order these things or I won't pay for you, that's a very negative honest signal. Does that make sense? Or even take her somewhere for free that you just enjoy.
It means generally the higher, like it comes out on an average like $80 or $90. So that.
Yeah. So take her somewhere less expensive that you actually enjoy, or take her somewhere free. Take her to do an activity you enjoy, something like that, if it's a concern for you, right? Again, the biggest thing, and this is important, the biggest thing for the girls is the experience. All those other factors, like is it a nice place, matters a little bit, right? Did it cost money, matters a little bit, right? Is it well reviewed by Yelp, matters a little bit. What matters the most is, did you and she have a good experience there? So focus on that. Focus on your dates on how do we have a good experience that's gonna lead towards the vibe I wanna have for sex, not how do I tick all the resume check boxes.